Welcome to the latest installment of Don't Take This as Gospel. I'm Mike Partika, and today we're talking about how Bible translations matter. Now, a friend of mine recently went to a open house of a Mormon temple. Now, apparently, whenever there's a renovation that's done on a temple, then for a short period of time, members of the general public are allowed to enter the temple and see all the beautiful architecture and artwork inside and learn a little about the Mormon church. Normally, it's closed to the public. So my friend went inside, and one of the things that she saw while in there was the Mormon baptismal font. Now, this is where new members get baptized into the church, but there's also another ritual that takes place here, and it's a Mormon ritual called the baptism for the dead. Now, what happens in the baptism for the dead is that you take a descendant of a person who was not in the Mormon church or who died before the Mormon church was established even, and having proven that this person is an actual biological descendant of that person, you can then get baptized. You can then baptize that descendant on behalf of the dead person to induct that person after death into the Mormon church. This is one of the reasons, by the way, that Mormons are kind of obsessed with genealogy. It's a matter of rescuing their dead ancestors and inducting them into the church when they may not have had the opportunity to have been inducted before. So my friend was complaining about this, she being a Christian, saying, I don't know of any place in the Bible that talks about that. And I said, well, you need to get out your Bible then, because I'm going to point you to a particular verse. And that verse is 1 Corinthians 15:29. So as she's whipping out her Bible, I'm reading what it says and thinking, what will they do who are baptized for the dead if the dead do not rise at all? Why then are they baptized for the dead? And at that point, she was ready to read her line, and she said, if the dead will not be raised, what point is there in people being baptized for those who are dead? Why do it unless the dead will someday rise again? And I'm thinking, huh? Because, yeah, I mean, it's kind of the same point, but at the same time, that's not what's in my Bible. And then, of course, I realized that she and I are reading from different translations. I'm reading from the New King James Version. She's reading from the New Living Translation. Now, I'm not a huge fan of the New Living Translation, and the main reason for that is that it takes some liberties with the original texts for ideological purposes. For example, Matthew 4:18-19. In the New King James Version, we have Jesus walking by the Sea of Galilee, saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and Andrew his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. Then he said to them, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. Now you can see the clever little play on words that took place here. They were fishermen, and he says, I'll make you fishers of men. It's kind of indicative of Jesus' cleverness that he engages in these kinds of wordplay. However, if you look at how the New Living Translation translates this, one day as Jesus was walking along the shore of the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, also called Peter, and Andrew, throwing a net into the water, for they fished for a living. Jesus called out to them, come, follow me, and I will show you how to fish for people. Okay, yeah, this doesn't really capture it. I mean, I understand how they're trying to keep the wordplay intact by saying fish for a living versus fish for people, but it doesn't flow. It doesn't have the same punch as fishermen and fishers of men. And of course, the reason why they're doing that is because fishers of men, of course, sounds gender exclusive, and we wouldn't want to be gender exclusive in today's day and age, now wouldn't we? Oh, goodness. So, I am not a huge fan of the New Living Translation for that reason. Now, why do I use the New King James Version? Well, in order to tell you that, I have to take you through my Bible journey. And my Bible journey starts in a place where you probably wouldn't expect it to start, in the Dallas Morning News, specifically the opinion column, where one particular writer wrote in on the topic of homosexuality. And then he proceeded to make a list of references in the Bible to homosexuality as a proof that the Bible rejects homosexual conduct. Now, Me, I was agnostic and I didn't know anything about the Bible. I didn't know anything about how the Bible talks about homosexuality. So I thought, aha, this person's giving me all these references. I'm going to go look up all of these references in the Bible and I'm going to see whether this person is telling the truth or whether he's taking these verses out of context or whether there's some other modifying explanation for all this. And I'm going to see whether the Bible actually does speak out against homosexual conduct. So, problem was is I didn't have a Bible, and this was in the pre-internet days. You know, you could probably tell that just from the fact that I had a newspaper at my disposal. But in the pre-internet days, you couldn't just go online and do a Bible lookup and type in a verse number and up it pops, you know, whether you're in Google or Bing or whatever you're using as your search engine. We didn't even have search engines in those days for the most part. So what I had to do was find a book. Now I didn't want to buy a book offhand because I wasn't really ready to do that. I just wanted to get a copy of a Bible and look through these particular verses and see if they said what this guy said they said. So I went to the public library, and I went and I looked at the Bible section. Now, what one of the things that I noticed straight away from picking up a couple of different Bible translations and then going and looking at all of these verses is that number one, the guy was absolutely right. He was absolutely right about the Bible's condemnation of homosexual conduct. And so that led me to understand that I was, basically wrong, thinking that there was anything to be challenged there. And I had to ask myself the question, what else am I wrong about? So the second thing, after looking up these verses in the Bible, was I wanted to go and read the Bible, because if you haven't read the Bible, if you don't actually know what's in there, then you're not qualified to really talk about it. I thought prior to this whole encounter that I knew something about the Bible, and it turns out I was 100% wrong. I thought I was going to find that, I was going to find things that modified the context so that, no, homosexual conduct, that's not condemned in there. Nope, totally was. So, what else was I wrong about? Well, the only way that I could know that was to go through the Bible myself, read the Bible for the first time. And in order to do that, I had to pick a version. So, I looked at the King James Version first because, let's face it, this is the most popular version of all of the different translations of the Bible that is out there, which is kind of sad because there are some glaring, obvious errors in how these things were translated that are largely a function of how people spoke English at the time, hundreds of years ago, when this version was created. For example, Exodus 20:13 in the King James Version says plainly, "Thou shalt not kill." This is part of the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not kill. Well, what could be any clearer than that? Except when you get to Exodus 21 and you're told that you're supposed to execute people who commit murder. How does that fit with "thou shalt not kill"? You just told me "thou shalt not kill," and now you're telling me I'm supposed to execute murderers? How does that work? Well, of course, taken as it says, or in our understanding of kill, which is basically a generic form of homicide, it doesn't really specify murder there. But the problem is that the Hebrew word used for kill actually does specify murder and not just any kind of generic killing. So when the New King James Version came out, they corrected that and basically said, "You shall not murder." And now it makes perfect sense when you look at Exodus 20 and it says, "You shall not murder," and Exodus 21 says, "Execute murderers." Execution is not murder. It's not the same thing. So this is one of the kind of glaring errors that exist. And by the way, I've got a video on this called 3 Quick Points About Murder that goes into this a little bit more in detail. So do check out that video when you get a chance. There's another glaring error, and it occurs in the book of Isaiah, Isaiah 45:7, King James Version says, "I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things." Now, I know very, very smart people who have gotten completely thrown astray by this particular verse because they think, oh, Look, it says God creates evil. What could be more clear than that? It's not Satan that all the evil in the world is attributed to. God creates evil too. Thinking that this somehow means moral evil, but it absolutely doesn't. What it actually means, and I see I've got a little typo here, so let me fix this. What Isaiah 45:7 should actually say is, I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create calamity. I, the Lord, do all these things. And it should be obvious because we're talking about opposites here. God is capable of creating opposite things. I form light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. Well, if evil is the opposite of peace, then what you're talking about really here is not morality. You're talking about good times and bad times. You're talking about desirable circumstances and undesirable circumstances. God is responsible for everything that happens in the world from an overarching perspective, and he is capable of creating circumstances that you like and circumstances that you don't like. So that's why in the New King James Version, they clear this up and say, I make peace and create calamity, so that it's clear that we're not talking about moral evil here. And I've got another video that is on this as well. It's called There's Evil and Then There's Evil. So go check that out, because this has been a verse that has confused some very intelligent people. Now, in my Bible journey, I settled on the Revised Standard Version because I didn't want the King James Version for the reasons that you saw beforehand. I was aware that there were these glaring errors in the King James Version, and I didn't want to get tripped up over something like that. So I wanted something that still kept the archaic flavor of the text, the same way the New Living Translation does not. I may be taking a few more pot shots at the New Living Translation. I'm just going to let you know in advance. The New Living Translation is just too colloquial for my taste. I didn't want something that didn't have that same ancient flavor to it. So the Revised Standard Version is the version that I checked out of the library. Yes, I actually checked out a Bible from the library. It happens. and I even renewed it because 2 weeks was not enough to read the whole thing. I needed at least 4 weeks, and even then I wound up skimming through it to the point that I realized I needed to buy my own Bible. So I went to Mardell's bookstore after this to find a Revised Standard Version Bible. Well, they didn't have that anymore, unfortunately. I had to settle for a new Revised Standard Version Holy Bible because this is basically the updated version of the Revised Standard Version. It's a little bit more reader friendly, and it corrects for a couple of errors in translation that had gone on in the past, but not enough, though. Not enough, I learned. It did not correct for all the errors that were in there, because later on, when reading various Bible commentaries, I discovered an error in the New Revised Standard Version. And it came in 1 Corinthians 7:36 through 38. In the New Revised Standard Version, this pack of verses reads, if anyone thinks that he is behaving indecently toward his fiancée, if his passions are strong, and so it has to be, let him marry as he wishes. It is no sin. Let them marry. But if someone stands firm in his resolve, being under no necessity, but having his own desire under control, and has determined in his own mind to keep her as his fiancée, he will do well. So then, he who marries his fiancée does well, and he who refrains from marriage will do better. And this is all in keeping with Paul's theme for the entire chapter of 1 Corinthians 7, in which he says, there are some people who are cut out for marriage. There are some people who are going to live the single life. It's better, actually, to live the single life, because then all you have to do is worry about pleasing God. You don't have to worry about pleasing your wife. You don't have to worry about taking care of kids. It's a much easier life when all you have to do, when it's just you and God, when all you have to do is tend to God's desires and God's needs. Now, however, some people are born with a sex drive, and that sex drive is supposed to be channeled into marriage. By the way, marriage to a person of the opposite sex. So, once you have determined which kind of person you are and you know which kind of life you can lead, then you decide on the single path or you decide on the married path. Now, Paul seems to be saying here in the according to the New Revised Standard Version, that maybe you've got a couple who have been betrothed. They are supposed to get married, but at the same time, they don't have that sexual passion between them such that they really need to express it in marriage. And so it's perfectly okay if they just want to live as friends, if they just want to live without engaging in sexual intercourse because sexual intercourse is not something that they need. So, that is what the New Revised Standard Version says. However, when I went to look at Bible commentaries on these particular verses, I found them talking about how the person in question was not a person betrothed, but rather the father of a young woman who was to be married off. And so I looked at the New King James Version, and here it said, but if any man thinks he is behaving improperly toward his virgin, meaning virgin daughter, if she is past the flower of youth, and thus it must be, let him do what he wishes. He does not sin. Let them marry. Nevertheless, he who stands steadfast in his heart, having no necessity, but has power over his own will, and has so determined in his heart that he will keep his virgin daughter, does well. So then he who gives her in marriage does well, but he who does not give her in marriage does better. Now, taken this way, if you look at the verses from this perspective, what Paul is actually talking about is a man who has female children, he has daughters, and in those days, because you couldn't, most men could not indefinitely sustain a family that was, both all of his children all together, then the children would need to be married off. You'd have to have the sons marry and establish their own households, or at least they would strike out on their own. But the daughters, unless they were married off, would also stay within the household and they would be a financial burden. So the point here is really that if you have a man who has the financial resources to support his daughters and keep them at home with him such that he doesn't have to marry them off, then that's actually better than her having to than these women having to be married off, unless that's not necessarily what's best for them. And it can be gauged on an individual by individual basis. But the point being is that the father has the option to marry off his daughter or not to marry off his daughter. And therefore, if he does marry her off, okay, that's fine. I mean, that's part of the whole plan of God to basically have married families anyway. But also, if he has the financial wherewithal to keep his daughters with him, then he has that option as well. And it may wind up turning out to be for the best if they don't marry. So, having surveyed a bunch of commentaries and realizing that it is this New King James Version of this passage that is the more accurate one, I decided that I would abandon the New Revised Standard Version and go to the New King James Version. And that is the version that I have settled on so far. Now, these days, you have access online to enormous Bible study tools. You have online resources like blueletterbible.org. This is one of my particular favorites because from here you can very, very easily compare multiple Bible translations together and see which ones really seem to fit the correct meaning of the text, depending on what you read in the various commentaries that you may be exposed to. Now, why is this necessarily important, especially in the case of 1 Corinthians 15:29? Well, I had to go back and read a couple of commentaries on this because I wanted to just refamiliarize my experience with this verse and also get some commentators' opinions on what this whole baptism for the dead process was about that Paul is referencing here. And one of the things that a commentator by the name of David Guzik points out is that number one, we're not really told whether this is a Christian practice or not. We don't know if this is a Christian practice that was discontinued very early on in the church, which, by the way, would not conflict at all with Mormon beliefs, since they believe that they are the true and restored church and that the early Christian church just apostatized like right off the bat. But is this a Christian practice that was discontinued very early on in Christian history? Or maybe Paul is referring to a pagan practice that went on outside the church and which Christians could at least refer to as a touch point for Paul's overall message in 1 Corinthians 15 about the resurrection and about the validity of believing in the resurrection. Belief in the resurrection is central to Christianity. You're not a Christian if you don't believe that the dead are raised. This is basically Paul's argument in 1 Corinthians 15. And by pointing to this ceremony about being baptized for the dead and saying, what will they do who are baptized for the dead if the dead do not rise at all? Why then are they baptized for the dead? He's basically saying that their motivation is to benefit this dead person somehow. And that would make no sense whatsoever if this person, upon being dead, just simply ceased to exist. You have to believe that person is going to be raised from the dead someday. If you think that you're being baptized in that person's stead is going to affect that person's eternal destiny at all. And so in the New King James Version, you see that the emphasis here is on the people who are being baptized for the dead, not necessarily the ceremony itself. David Guzik says, if you look at this, you see that the focus is on what will they do who are baptized for the dead if the dead don't rise at all? Why then are they baptized for the dead? It's not that Paul is necessarily validating the ceremony itself. He's just validating the fact that these people are doing it. And if they are doing it, it means that they believe that the dead must rise, because otherwise there'd be no reason to do it. Now, in the New Living Translation, the focus of the sentence has shifted. The focus of the verse now is the practice of being baptized for those who are dead. It says, if the dead will not be raised, what point is there in people being baptized for those who are dead? Why do it unless the dead will someday rise again? And so the New Living Translation, in jiggering around with these words, has basically shifted the focus away from the mindset of people who are participating in this ritual, and they've shifted the focus to the ritual itself so that it actually looks like Paul is validating the ceremony, in which case you kind of have to ask, well, if the ceremony is something valid, why don't Christians do it anymore? And so this is another reason why I believe the New Living Translation is not the best translation that you could get, because this is a clear-cut case where it by a subtle change of words has shifted the focus of the sentence such that now it is validating a ceremony that appears nowhere in modern Christianity. So, yeah, this is why I still to this day prefer the New King James Version, and it's another example of why my overall theme is Bible translations matter. So, that has been my episode here of Don't Take This as Gospel. If you'd like to pick up more information about the beliefs of the early Christian church, some of the earliest Christians, then you can pick up my books, Holding God in Accurate Knowledge, The Watchtower and the Early Church Fathers, and my book, The Testimony of History to the Souls in Hell. These two books in particular don't say anything about the Mormon Church. They actually refer to another offshoot cult of Christianity, which is the Jehovah's Witnesses, and their beliefs, which are contrary to the beliefs of the early church fathers. And these books kind of detail their attempts, at least in the first case, to appropriate the early church fathers to their side, even though the early church fathers did not concur with their or do not concur with their beliefs. So do check out these books. I have a link to my Amazon site and to some other sites where you can pick up my ebooks, and check out the other ebooks I have there, including my book, The Cultural Bill of Rights, my humor book, Try to Blend In, and my book collecting 20 years of thoughts on politics, religion, and life, thoughts along the way. I'm Mike Partika. Thanks again for watching. This has been Don't Take This as Gospel. Please do subscribe so that you can get notified of future episodes, and also future videos that deal with other content like politics and other religious matters, and matters involving comic books now. I have a comic book playlist that I've just started out that you might be interested in checking out. So thanks again for watching, and I will talk to you. to you later.